I'm really proud of what came out, though, because it ends up being a book that's about so many different concepts. Really, ultimately, it's about connections that we make in our lives, but it's also about memory. It's about aging. It's about life after your parents are gone. It ended up what I thought was a frivolous project at first ends up being what I think is possibly the most meaningful book I've written, and I'm just so proud of the work that's included here.
That is Matt Mason, author of the book At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine, Disneyland, Midlife, and Churros. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, welcome to episode 187 of the Tomorrow Society podcast, the final episode before the end of 2022. Can you believe it? It's been a really fun year, and I think we're closing it on a good note with Matt Mason, the author of At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine, Disneyland, Midlife, and Churros. I've read a lot of books on history of Disneyland, lots of different thoughts guidebooks, so much more, and this is very different for me, and I enjoyed it. Matt is the state poet of Nebraska, and this is a collection of poetry, but don't let that stop you. So many cool poems about attractions like Space Mountain or Mr. Toad, about churros, about food, family, emotions, so much cool stuff. And Matt and I dig into all of it here on the show. And also, I ask him some fun Disneyland questions at the end. And really, it's just fun to just kind of geek out about Disneyland and enjoy it. And Matt's book is a cool way to do that. So let's get right to it. Here is Matt Mason. Really enjoyed your book, and the poems, just I could tell coming from a big fan as myself and everything. So it's great to have you on to dig more into it. And I'd love to know a little bit more before we even start, just about like your background with Disneyland, like how you got interested either growing up and then maybe more recently going as an adult. Like, what's your story with Disneyland?
My Disneyland story started, I was 4 and my parents took us all on a family trip there. And then I went once more with my parents when I was about 9, but then didn't go for a while. But I was in college in the Bay Area and went down a couple times with friends. And then a few years after college, stopped by and visited some friends there. This is before internet and all, so we had to calculate, okay, 9 a.m. we'll meet off to the left. Because, we didn't have cell phones. I might have had a pager. Who knows? But then after my mom passed away at the end of 2014, and ended up, taking my whole family the next year in the spring of 2015. So my wife and my 2 daughters, and we had a blast. So we went back again a little bit after that. But it was always, a good place, warm memories. And I wasn't like the biggest, hardcore Disney fan. And until one day I just kind of woke up and couldn't stop thinking about it.
So that's interesting because, a lot of people, and I know you live in Nebraska, like I mentioned, whereas I'm in Missouri. So it's a similar thing where I would go to Disney World, but it wasn't like I lived there. So you have a different connection to it where it's more like an event rather than a local park or something. So, given that fact, how did you get interested in actually then writing about Disneyland and, publishing a book? Because given what you've described, I mean, it sounds like you were a fan, but it doesn't sound like, like some where it was every, a core part growing up the whole way.
Yeah, it wasn't. It's a long trip to just get there in the first place. So I hadn't gone, a ton. And it was a strange thing in that I turned 49, and basically one day I just woke up thinking about Disneyland and then found myself really interested and looking up articles and then books and then subscribing to podcasts and watching videos. And it just was a weird thing. It struck me as a bad TV sitcom of midlife crisis episode or something. And I didn't know what to make of it because it was pretty strange to suddenly wake up with this kind of compulsion. And I was not writing about it, actually. I write a poem a week, and I'm not doing all this research and not doing any writing about what I'm researching until my wife, who's also a poet, she kind of noticed. I was trying to hide this from her, but she gets into the car and I switch the podcast off real quick. She's like, "What are you listening to?" A Disneyland podcast. And so she's like, "You're doing all the research, just write." And so I did. I started writing poems just about Disneyland. And then the more and more I wrote, the more I figured out, that whatever I was encountering had a lot to do with Disneyland, but mainly as, it was about a lot more than that. And by looking at the times I'd been to Disneyland in my life, as a kid with my parents, as a college student, as an adult with my family, all these intersections in Disneyland are really what I ended up writing about.
Well, yeah, you mentioned midlife, and that's in the title of the book, because I'm 46, so similar age, went to the parks at a similar time. And I had a similar thing where I went as a kid, didn't go for a while, and then went more as an adult. But I'm curious, what do you think it is about, and I say this as someone who's doing a podcast about theme parks, so I have a little bit of connection to this, but what is it about Disneyland or about, that in particular that is going, like, as you reach midlife, that is going to connect with you in that way? Because I know there's a lot of people that have a similar experience where they go as a kid and then somehow kind of, I wouldn't say drift, but end up back so obsessed with it, but in a totally different way.
Yeah, I think for me, it is that these significant parts of my life all intersect at Disneyland. And Disneyland is a place that, it's recognizable from 1955 to today as the same place. There are parts of it, the wall with the bricks on it off the side of Main Street that supposedly was testing the brick patterns and stuff. And all these things that are still there. It's very much the same place I went to when I was 4. A few attractions have changed, this and that has changed, but it all really still connects this in a similar way. And, it's a great place.
Oh, yeah.
Space Mountain rocks. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can't go wrong there. With a great place. Yeah. And you write in the book, too, about, lost family members, like you mentioned, your mom and everything around the same time. And my parents are alive, but I still think about, like, all those, like, you see, my memories of being a kid. A lot of them somehow end up at Walt Disney World. Like you could have a year and it's like, I remember a little bit of school and then a vacation or something. Like, I'm curious, for you, like, looking back, you put some photos in the book. Like, how much did, like, those photos then kind of all intersect with thinking about your parents or, loss and everything else with Disneyland?
Much like what you said, I have great memories, vague memories though, too. So it's kind of fascinating to, after my mom passed away and, I'm the one who got the big box of photographs and I'm already looking at Disneyland stuff or doing the research. So I start looking through this box of photos, trying to find vacation photos. And I find the Disneyland ones. And there aren't a ton because, this was the 70s. It was a different age. Where you weren't taking a million photos every day. You take maybe 24, get them developed, get them back 3 weeks later. Yeah. So it was kind of a different thing. And it kind of fascinating me because I found some great photos of being there when I was 4 and then found like a couple random photos from when I was about 9 on a trip I did not remember. And so it was kind of fascinating to piece together my own, Disneyland history with these that only there's no memories in my head, but there's pieces of paper that kind of show that this happened. It was just kind of cool that way.
Yeah, it's almost like you're investigating your past that you,
Yeah.
like you said, you don't remember. Because my parents recently they moved and they gave me all these pictures, and there were some where I was like, "Huh," I remember very well, like, "Oh, we stayed here," or "Oh, I loved Mr. Toad," or "We liked the rides," or whatever, something specific. But then, yeah, there are other things where you end up going back to them, and you're like, I don't have any memory of us going to that at all, which is weird because then it kind of, I know it doesn't when they're gone, but it still kind of connects to that. So, and that's
Yeah.
direct. I feel like you mentioned it being larger than just Disneyland. That definitely seems to fit with the book and kind of what you're getting at there. Where, I mean, when you started thinking, okay, I'm going to publish this, were you thinking originally, oh, I'm going to write a lot of things about Disneyland, or how much did those type of memories really like drive the book at the start?
It was all a process. I mean, I write to kind of figure things out. I write to figure out the world, figure out my life. I think poetry's amazing for that. And so I didn't really have a plan when I started other than I'm obsessed with Disneyland. I'm going to write poems. And as I wrote more poems, though, I started narrowing it down, because when I was first doing research, I was researching the Disney company, Disneyland Tokyo, Disney World, even though I haven't been to either of those. I'm doing all this research and really discovered it was focusing more and more on just Disneyland. And then the more I wrote, my parents would creep into poems, and different things would kind of find their way into poems. And a lot of it ended up, being just talking about memory. There's a whole poem just about memory and how fallible it is. And, looking back to those, what I do and don't remember of all the trips there. And, by the time I finished the book, the whole obsession made sense to me, and I think sometimes that's what art does. I think sometimes, at least for me, because I'm kind of dumb in that, there's a lot going on in my head and there's a lot going on emotionally, and then there's a wall in between, and there's not a lot of conversation. But if I sit down and write, I find, doors opening up and figuring out better what I feel, why I feel it, what's going on. And it's, it was a strange Disneyland journey, but it was a blast. Not just the writing, not just kind of figuring things out, but looking back at these different times in my life. And of course, the research, because I had to go to Disneyland.
Sounds terrible.
I know, it's difficult.
So, yeah, I read this, that you went and actually did like a 2-week residency at Disneyland while working on the book. I mean, how much did you do a lot of writing? I believe you did some while you were there in the park, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, it was. So I'd been on a writing residency the year before at an established place where you go, you spend 2 weeks writing, you get a little support. And afterward, I'm thinking, well, I could do this most anywhere. And so I was like, okay, maybe I should do this at Disneyland. So I had got an annual pass back when it was a lot less expensive. 2018, January, great month to buy an annual pass. And ended up, spending 2 weeks there where I would go in. There was a little table outside a Jolly Holiday that I really loved. And, it was usually free at 8 in the morning because most people are rushing elsewhere in the park. So I would sit and I would write and I would edit other poems and, take a break, get a churro and write a couple of things and then go back to work. So And just wander the area too, wander downtown Disney, wander the neighborhood. My pass didn't let me in on Saturdays, so there was a Saturday in the middle where I just kind of wandered Anaheim by foot. So yeah, it was a lot of fun exploring.
That sounds nice, for a variety of reasons. One, for the book, because it's helpful, but also just that time, because, you're able to actually, because I'm still used to going to parks where it's like, okay, we've got a day or two. There's 35 things we want to do and everything. And this is like not that. This is where you're able to kind of like you're a resident of Disneyland basically in a way where you're almost treating it. It's like I mentioned, like a city park or a city cafe, which I'm sure played a lot of role in the book, I suspect.
Oh yeah, it really did, and it let me, having that time, I took the Walking in Walt's Footsteps tour and the Golden Circle tour, and did some extra things that normally, if I'm coming from Nebraska, I'm just going for a day or two, and I'm riding as many attractions as I can, and then I'm out of there. So it was great to just take it at a slow pace and really enjoy it, and really get to, sit at a table and watch people at rope drop rather than, being all kind of mapping out my own day of where I'm going, how fast I can get there, all that. So
yeah, like, what are we going to eat? Whoa, how are we going to stop for this? It's like, you're able to kind of like, oh, this is good. It's almost like, yeah, you're totally different, because I noticed too, like the title of the book, you have quite a few poems that relate to certain spots in Disneyland or a certain location where you talk about like the sights and the smells and the sounds. I suspect, I mean, that a lot of those came up while you spent so much time there. Like, how much did like you start to gauge, okay, this spot is interesting, or I really like this spot when you were there?
It really started, I think the first one of those I wrote was one at the corner of Fantasy and Tomorrow. Which was just a fun little poem about basically set right at the turkey leg stand by the Matterhorn. I really liked that idea of, not just writing about the park as a large thing, but what are the specific points in the park that are really interesting? And I think the most interesting to me are where the lands meet. And there's a little bit of overlap maybe or something. And it was just kind of fun to explore those little tiny points of geography, and also just, one thing I was really fascinated with in Disneyland is, even though I'd been there a full week already, I would find new little pathways that I didn't know had been there, and find different ways of getting around to different parts of the park. And it just seems like no matter how long you're there, there's always more. So
right, which is, I think, especially with Disneyland, the way it's set up, because like Florida, I know you haven't mentioned you haven't been to Disney World, is so much larger, which can be good for crowds, but isn't great for that, because the paths are big and they're designed knowing we're going to get tons of people, where Disneyland was designed originally in the 50s, where they knew it would be popular, but not that much. And so I think that the connection between lands, like I noticed, at least when I've been to World more, but like you are in Tomorrow, like especially on that side with New Orleans Square and Adventureland and all that, like you're in like 3 different lands within like a minute or two of each other. So I think it's great you were able to kind of spend more time seeing some of those areas, which you might not see on a short trip.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was that, there's one poem that I wrote on Tom Sawyer Island, just enjoying the landscape there and all. The other poems I wrote at other parts of the park, a lot of them were written either here in Omaha or at Jolly Holiday. But it was just fun to find these different parts of the park and have the time to just, sit and watch people and take some notes and things like that.
Okay, so I have to ask you about churros, which I know you enjoy. I enjoy too. Churros are great, but I never would think of churros. I mean, I know Disneyland churros are like legendary, but how much of your enjoyment is the fact that you're eating them at Disneyland? If you were eating them in Omaha, would they be as good?
It's hard to say, because the churros they have at Disneyland are good. And, I've eaten the churros out in downtown Disney, and they're not as, there's something about the Disneyland churros that have the right amount of crunch, the right amount of flavor. They're not too big, they're not too small. So it's kind of tough. I mean, I've had churros in Omaha, I've made churros here, and they've been good. But yeah, there's just something about that combo of the right churros in the right place. Can't go wrong.
Well, I can't argue with that, because I know many people enjoy churros, and I do too. Like if I was sitting here right now, it's around lunchtime, and there was a churro, I'd be thrilled. I'd be like, "This is great. There's a churro here." So I'm mostly saying this in jest, but I still enjoy it talking about it because I'm like, oh, he really likes churros. This is something that's really going throughout the book. So even variety of poems. So you also write a lot of poems about attractions, like there's ones Mr. Toad, Space Mountain, and Dumbo. I'm curious, possibly those or others. Like, what are some of these attractions that just like stay in your brain? Like, I have attractions that occupy space in my brain. Like, especially given how much time you spent there, when you would do a few, what were the ones you just kept going back to mentally or physically?
My number one choice is Space Mountain. I don't know, for whatever reason, the music, everything about it, but the 2018 residency, spending 2 weeks there. At that time, they had a single rider line, so man, you could just pop on that thing a number of times every hour. So I probably, in those 2 weeks, I think I counted, it was more than 40 times that I rode Space Mountain. It was by far the lead. But I also love the Matterhorn, especially if you can get on it right at the same time the fireworks are going off. I perfected the timing on that by the end of my time there, because that was, I think, my favorite for fireworks. And then Pirates, Haunted Mansion, Mr. Toad. I love Peter Pan. It's just so hard to get on. So I probably only rode it a couple times that whole week. And the train. I love getting on the train, and especially that stretch with between Tomorrowland and Main Street, where you get the Grand Canyon diorama and all that stuff. I mean, I could probably keep listing until I've listed every attraction. So.
Then I'll be like, which ones did he not list? Which are the ones he doesn't enjoy as much? Those five. Oh yeah, that's the thing about Disneyland too. Like you mentioned the train and that part, or even Space Mountain, which I grew up loving Space Mountain to Walt Disney World, which is a little rough and doesn't have the music like it does. And then you go on the Disneyland one and you're like, it's kind of like Pirates, same deal. You're like, oh my gosh, what was I missing? It's like my brain didn't understand it. Well, those are all great choices, I know. I mean, what do you think it is about, you listed mostly attractions that, I mean, some were redone in the 80s, but most of them were kind of the older classics. What is it about those for you that keeps them kind of resonating so strongly as you ride them over and over?
I think, especially the older ones, they just appeal to me because they were there in previous trips. They bring back the memories. They bring back the feelings, whether I consciously know it or just kind of feel it in my body. There's a different kind of joy. Like I've got memories of during the fireworks. So no one was in line, and we had been waiting earlier in the day to get on Space Mountain, and we're happy to wait, 40 minutes. But all of a sudden you could ride it and then sprint to the front and go right through the queue with no wait again. And just that amazing joy of, holy cow, this is incredible. It's still there, the feeling with the ride. And, the one time I went on Space Mountain and it stopped and the lights came on. It's like, oh my God, this is amazing.
That's the thing when you get to ride those enough times where you catch all the things, especially Space Mountain, where it's like you're flying by and you're like, wait, I didn't know. Like, I'll even notice going up the lift hill or something. I'm like, I didn't know that was there. I don't know why I haven't looked at that before. And then with the lights on, I mean, I've ridden in Florida the People Mover, and you ride through and the lights are on, and you're like, can we please stop the People Mover right now? Please, I want to see this. But I mean, I can't argue with that. And like you said, during fireworks, like especially today with all the layers to get through, if you can walk on something, it's like somebody had you the golden ticket, or like, you're like, what?
Yeah.
I can just get on. I don't understand. It's incredible. Looking back at the book, I'm curious, now that it's finished and you're coming out and talking about it, like what stands out to you as something you're either like most proud of or that really kind of sticks with you from the book now that it's completed?
What really sticks out to me is that when I was so hesitant to start the book because I just didn't think, I just thought it was frivolous. My previous book was all poems about Nebraska. The book before that was all about being a parent. And, they had all these different angles and things. And here, when I started, I just thought, I'm writing about, a wonderful theme park run by a international company. So I think I'm really proud of what came out, though, because it ends up being a book that's about so many different concepts. Really, ultimately, it's about connections that we make in our lives, but it's also about memory. It's about aging. It's about life after your parents are gone. It ended up what I thought was a frivolous project at first ends up being what I think is possibly the most meaningful book I've written, and I'm just so proud of the work that's included here.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah, well, I wanted to mention too that you talk kind of about being unsure about writing about it, just given what you've written about, because you even have poems where it's like there's like an image of Karl Marx holding a corn dog, or even or things like that. Where I feel like Disneyland does this. It has this weird mix of like high art and I wouldn't say low art, but like mainstream commercial art. For you, like kind of grasping that, does it somehow transcend all of it and be kind of its own thing? Or like, how did you kind of grasp that part of it when you're mentioning Keats and Karl Marx and everything, along with churros and corn dogs?
Well, I mean, it ends up being kind of easy because this is Disney itself is a company that makes these amazing high art movies and also kids movies and some hits, some misses. I mean, it's all over the place. And at the park, the same thing. You've got rides that last forever, it seems, and other ones that are there for a couple years and get yanked out. And it's also a place that Walt intended to be about education. And I love that aspect. And I wish there was more of it these days. I mean, that was one of the fun things about just going into the history too, is just seeing the art as well as the corniness, as well as all the music, when you go and you really pay attention to the plant life there, it's incredible. I mean, all these different details of 100 different genres or studies, it's all there.
Yeah, it's all, I love the way you describe that, just the mix of everything, the music and the plant life and, everything else. It's really special. Well, before we finish talking about your book, if you would like to read a poem that I think summarizes the book, I think that would be great and also would give listeners kind of an idea of maybe something of how the book is.
Yeah, I would love to. This is a poem near the end of the book. And this is one that, I mean, I really didn't have a book until I wrote this poem, because I think so much comes together in this poem. So this poem's called What You Find at Disneyland Is. That when you come here on a trip by yourself and investigate why you can't stop thinking about the place and had thought maybe it was the park itself and Walt and all his stories, is that you were wrong. And you're here because of you and all the stories you've been part of on trips made here in past years to this cheerful once upon an orange grove. And it's like pulling out boxes from the basement and trying to fit into clothes from different ages of your life. And you can't, with them small or faded or so brittle they splinter apart like straw or just out of fashion, because you can't be 4 or 25 or 46 ever again. You have to walk with one stiff elbow, the toe and heels that hurt, all these small pains that now take ages to soothe. You can't change any of this, except maybe that gut. But man, you've come to exactly the wrong place for that. When there are churro carts, peanut butter dipped in chocolate, 1,000 sweet things shaped like Mickey Mouse's head, there is a legendary sandwich you find to be ham and cheese wedged inside of something more funnel cake than bread. You came here to ride Space Mountain and find answers. But the answers aren't on roller coasters. They're in the rhythm of your body's aches as you hike up Disneyland Drive, thinking about trips with your daughters, wife, parents, friends you find yourself walking without, here in the middle of your life, halfway to the next. Don't you dare waste a breath.
Wow, that's great. It adds a lot when you read it too, versus when I read it. I think it's excellent. I was just hoping that we had no technical issues because that was so good. I'm glad that we blew through it. But yes, great job, internet and world.
Yes.
No, seriously, that's great, and I think summarizes really well what I enjoyed about the book. Before we finish, though, Matt, I'm thinking it would be fun. Could I ask you a few kind of random, fun Disneyland questions? Are you game
Oh,
for
hit me.
this? I mean, I admit some of them are rather silly, not super highbrow, but I think we can do it. Okay.
All right, I'm in.
So, which of these two would you think, as a kid, is more frightening at Disneyland? One, being struck by a train and going to hell on Mr. Toad. Or two, encountering the Wicked Witch repeatedly in the past version of Snow White's Scary Adventures. Which is scarier, Matt?
Oh, man, that is tough because I really love them both now, and try to put myself into the head of a kid, maybe the witch.
Yeah, probably. I remember doing both as a kid, and sometimes we just avoided the Snow White because my either like me or one of my siblings was like, no. Now it's very bright from what I've not been to the new version, but I've heard it's very nice. Okay.
I like the new version. But I really like the old version too. So, and Toad is so whimsical that even if you're going to hell, it's like, all right.
Yeah, this looks fun. I'll hang out here. It's cool.
Yeah. Otherwise, how would they get away with a ride that ends in hell at Disneyland? It's just and keep it that way for years.
In 1955, they had that too. That was part of it. New version. I mean, they updated it, but still, same idea. It's crazy. All right. So let's say you go to Disneyland and the churros are gone. No churros left. And you have to choose one of these classic snacks. Now, which one would you choose? I'll give you three options. A Mickey ice cream bar, popcorn, because popcorn, big deal at Disneyland, or a Dole Whip. Which one are you going to pick?
Oh, Dole Whip. I love churros, but Dole Whips also. There's at least one poem all just about Dole Whips pretty much in the book.
Eating the Dole Whips in the tiki room is like the greatest invention ever. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Plus, it's the long tiki room, so you can it's longer than Florida, so it's cool.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that. All right.
Well, I could go off on a tangent about the fire and all this stuff, but people know about that. Okay, so this one is just more straightforward. So, which of these lands added by Disney recently is the one would be your favorite, or if you haven't done it, just interests you the most? So, Cars Land, which I'm sure you've probably done, Galaxy's Edge, or Avengers Campus. Which of these is your favorite, or are you most excited about?
Cars Land. That is incredible. I've been to all three of those, and they're great. But Cars Land is, I loved the movie when that was out, and I've got both my daughters when they were kids watched that movie. I watched the movie 100 times each with them, and still love it. So being able to walk. The first time I ever went into Cars Land was just incredible. It's like I am walking into a Pixar movie. This is awesome. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be my choice too. Even though I did enjoy Galaxy's Edge, but still, I think Cars Land is on a different scale. So, okay, I promise this is not controversial, but Disney recently announced Bob Iger is back as CEO. Bob Chapek's out. So let's say Bob Iger comes to you and says, Disney's really struggling. I have to take out one of these attractions. One of these three has to go. We don't have the money. Would you remove Haunted Mansion, Space Mountain, or Pirates of the Caribbean? Which one do you take out first?
Oh, I would pretend I had lost the ability to speak English because there is no answer. There is no answer to that. It's like, Mr. Iger, I'll be right back. Let me think about that. And he would never see me again.
Well, what if he said it's one or all three? Like, what if he said it's one or we're closing Disneyland? It's over.
Oh, man. I mean, there's no right answer.
I know.
The best I would be able to come up with, even though it's my favorite ride, I think it would have to be Space Mountain taking the bullet, just because I think Pirates and Haunted Mansion they're more than just rides. They have culture. They have fan clubs for individual pirates or ghosts. I mean, yeah. Whereas Space Mountain is an amazing couple minutes experience. Ah, that's a terrible choice, though.
I know it would never happen ever, but my choice would be Space
Why
Mountain.
would you do that to me, Iger? Come on.
Come on. That's it. He's out. No. But seriously, just for every listener's sake, we are recording this the morning after, basically, it was the announcement. So it's very fresh in the brain right now. It was a Sunday night, Okay, so 2 more.
It still feels like a prank. So.
Yes, it does. And I think it's going to feel that way for a while, possibly for 2 years. Okay, so you've mentioned past attractions or liking kind of older attractions. I think this one's fairly obvious, but you could surprise me. If you could bring back one of these, this is kind of the opposite of the last question. You don't have to remove anything. Would you bring back Country Bear Jamboree, Carousel Progress at Disneyland? I know it's still in Florida, but at Disneyland, or bring back the People Mover?
The weird thing, the one I have the best memory of, the only one I have any memories of is Country Bears. I don't remember the other two at all. So it might be Country Bears, but if I could throw in a fourth alternative, I would go with the older version of the submarine voyage, which that one I do remember. It was before Finding Nemo. It was all Captain Nemo with, the great sea serpent at the end. In my research, there was interviews with Bob Kraft talking about the sea serpent being dissolving somewhere in near his pool or something like that.
That's so interesting. And I went a lot on 20,000 Leagues in Florida a lot. Same sort of thing, though. Just, you wait in line forever and you're squished in and it's so uncomfortable and but it was convincing. I'm a kid. I was like, yeah, we dove under. Even though you see them when you're outside, you can see it. But no, that's a great choice. And for me, it'd be the People Mover only because I think that Tomorrowland needs it. But your choices, either one would be great. And, I approve of it. So I think I know the answer to this last question, though, because I think you already answered it earlier. But I'm going to ask it anyway. Just so you can rave about it some more. What is your favorite ride at Disneyland? Man,
it is Space Mountain. Someday I hope to ride the Ghost Galaxy version. I've heard of that, and I've ridden the Hyperspace Mountain. I've ridden that, and they're good too. But it's the basic Space Mountain with the surf guitar soundtrack. Something about that roller coaster in the dark is just awesome. And it's just fun the way they've got it all set up. So, man, it just seems like it should be a basic thing, and then it's not. So, man, props to you.
It's hard to do. Mountain. It's hard to do well, and the onboard audio, like I told you, and the effects going up the lift hill.
Yeah.
That adds so much. And I love the Florida version, but you cannot underestimate how important the audio is, whether it's the Michael Giacchino score or the surf score, or even with Hyperspace Mountain. It's huge. All right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
And I think, the last time I rode it too, and this happens more than once, but the last time I rode it, I'm right behind a dad and his, 8-year-old son. And, at the end, the son is, oh my God, that was awesome. It's like when you get to ride it behind somebody who's never ridden it before or something, it's like, yes, it.
Oh yeah. First roller coaster, like real roller coaster I rode was Space Mountain when I was 8. Ooh. So I still remember it was like late at night, no line. We just, awesome with my dad. So, same experience, it's a universal thing, I guess.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, before we finish, I know I mentioned that you're a Nebraska State Poet, so I'm curious, just what other things are you doing when you're not writing or going to Disneyland? Like, what is your kind of daily work and life involved? Because I'm sure it sounds really interesting.
Well, I until just a few months ago, I ran a nonprofit that sent writers into schools and correctional facilities. And I mean, that was an amazing job. I love it. I love the organization, but I've got a couple years left as state poet, and I really want to see if I can make my living just as a poet and a speaker. So I left that job. So I spent a lot of time sending emails now. But in a fun way, because, contacting libraries and arts agencies and others in colleges, just trying to set up appearances. Because I would love to, what I really love doing is going in and talking to students and doing readings and doing writing workshops. So it's like, for example, last week, I spent 3 days in Western Nebraska, up in the Panhandle, talking to high schools and doing events in the evening. So that is really what I love doing. And if I could find a way to make my living completely doing this, I'm going to do it, because it's everything I love.
Well, that sounds awesome. Well, also just love the book that, At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine, again, Disneyland, Midlife, and Churros. So if listeners want to learn more about it or pick up a copy, is there like the best places they should go?
Yeah, I mean, to pick up a copy, go to the press is The Old Mill Press at theoldmillpress.com, and they have been amazing. I mean, this is a book that when I was finishing it, I really had to deal with the reality that this is a book that might never be published, because who's going to publish it? I sent versions to poetry publishers, and they're like, yeah, Disneyland poetry, sure, no. Take this away. And then I would try to get a hold of Disney publishers, and they'd be like, a book of poetry? Are you serious? And then the Old Mill Press, they do these amazing Disneyland history and coffee table books, but they also had a few poetry titles on their website. So I contacted them, and so I love them. Buy the book at theoldmillpress.com. You can find more about me. I'm easy to find. Google Matt Mason Poet, but my website is midverse.com, MIDVERSE. So yeah, look me up. Bring me into your college or high school or whatever. So,
well, that sounds great. Yeah, and Old Mill Press. Yeah, the Claude Coates book they have is incredible. And
it's fantastic.
Dave Bossert has written a bunch. Yeah, has written a bunch of cool books. So, pick up your book, pick up some others. It's a great place to go. And Matt, this has been awesome. This has been fun. I could talk about Disneyland all day, but it's been so great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dan. This is a fun conversation. I really appreciate it.
Before we finish, I just wanted to take a moment to say thanks to all of you for listening to the show. Throughout the year, we've had 31 podcast episodes, starting with my trip to the Abraham Lincoln Library and Museum. Went through a bunch of cool Imagineers, so many fun shows this year. It's been awesome. And I just wanted to say to you too, just happy holidays, whichever holidays you celebrate. I hope that you're able to take a moment to just, appreciate what's going on, family, friends, work, whatever you're doing, that's cool. And it's been awesome to spend a small portion of the time with you, and can't wait for what's ahead. As I've already got several episodes that I'm really looking forward to for early January, and just going to keep rolling as we, going to take a short break here, but we'll be back in 2 weeks, the first week in January. I just want to say how much I appreciate all of you. I know there's so many cool podcasts out there, whether they're about theme parks or anything else. And the fact that you've taken the time to listen to this one really means a lot to me, and kind of keeps me pushing to try and, reach out to guests and try to do as good a show as I can. And I'm hoping to get to a lot of parks, whether it's Disney or regional parks or whatnot, this year, so I can report on that. And then also just keep connecting with really cool guests and have some returning guests. Just so much fun that we're going to have in 2023. And I'll skip giving all the usual, I'm out there on Patreon, out there on social media. You can always email me, dan@tomarosociety.com, all the usual places that I'm sure you've heard me talk about many times. always awesome to hear from you. I hope that you have a great last few weeks of the year and celebrate New Year's, and everything is going awesome. And I can't wait to bring some of the interviews I have coming up in January to you that you will find out about so soon. Take care out there. Thanks again. I'll talk to you again in 2023.